Hello, my name is Bryan Carlson. I'm an instructor at Fort Worth Country Day School. I have a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Texas, Austin, Master of Arts Teaching from Colorado College, and I'm currently a graduate student at the University of Florida, Gainesville. I'll be presenting today on Aeneid Book 4, a presentation which I cleverly call Dido's Relationship Status. It's complicated, exploring the status of union in Book 4. And this is a presentation which grows out of a symposium I attended at Samford University in the Christian intellectual tradition, in which we were discussing the relationship between Dido and Aeneas. And one of the people in our class said, "But they're married, aren't they?" And then suddenly became clear that not everyone could agree what exactly the relationship status was between the two of them at any point. And so I had the opportunity to do a research paper in a Virgil class at the University of Florida, and this presentation grows out of that research. So I hope you enjoy. All right. All right, so I'll be examining Dido's relationship status, specifically in Book 4 of Virgil's Aeneid. But structurally, I'll be looking at three elements. First, I'll be looking at what constitutes a legal marriage in Augustan Rome, and whether or not the author and or reader would have viewed what Aeneas and Dido participate in as a legal marriage. Then I'll look specifically at what elements might have been perceived by Dido as leading to her belief that they are married, because she states at one point that she believes that they are. And then Virgil hedges that bet a little bit. And then we'll look at the literary context as to what exactly is going on in Book 4, why Virgil might have done this, and provide hopefully some context as to why this interesting complex relationship is included in a text about epic city founding. To start off with, elements of legal marriage. Under Augustus, there's some revision and increase of legal status for marriage. The changes in marital laws were designed primarily to encourage the marriage and child production in upper class Romans. Those laws included financial penalties and incentives, penalties for those who were unmarried and childless, and incentives for those who were married and producing offspring. And there were restrictions on stuprum or extramarital sexual conduct. In order to be eligible to marry or to have connubium, the law states that generally women should be between the ages of 12 and 50 to be eligible for marriage. And men aren't restricted on the age at which they may marry, but they're expected to be married between their mid-20s all the way up until they're 60. And then sort of they get a pass. You must be unmarried, and there are restrictions with regard to the marriage between classes. Freed slaves are off limits, right? In order to have a legal marriage, there should be consent to marry, effectio maritalis, meaning that the parties involved in the marriage need to be consenting to that. They need to intend to live as a married couple and produce children, which is mens matrimonii. And this mindset is, of course, the focus of the legal marriage in Augustan Rome, since that was the primary goal of the revision of law. There can be a sponsalia, which is the agreement between parties, either made by the paterfamilias, or if there is not a paterfamilias, a tutela, which would be a guardian of an unmarried woman. And there do not appear to be any ceremonial prescriptions for a legal marriage. So there's not a marriage certificate, there's not a law regarding who may perform a marriage, or even what that might look like. All right, in the Aeneid, in Book 4, we do have a sort of a sponsalia, right? The Latin's there on the left, but what we have is around line 100 of Book 4, we have Juno and Venus, and the agreement is made, why not prefer to work at eternal peace and marriage hymns? You have all which you sought. Dido burns and is drawn into madness. through her bones. Thus, let's rule this population in kind with equal favors. Let her serve a Phrygian husband and send her Tyrians to your right hand as dowry. To which Venus gives only this much: go ahead, I'll follow. And Juno goes on. All right. So looking at Anna and Dido, they confer earlier in book 4 to see whether Dido, in fact, has consent to marriage. We have Dido saying that, Anna talks and says that she needs the dulcus natos veneris nec primia noris, right? You don't know the sweet rewards of Venus, children, right? And then she says, sister, how great a city you will see, what a great kingdom will rise up with such a husband, with armies of Trojans as allies, with what great deeds will Punic glory lift itself. And here we have Anna suggesting, 1, that they should live as a married couple, and 2, that they should produce children. So it seems like we have consent, intent, and a desire to produce children, which then here, that's specifically dulcus nato veneris, and know the sweet rewards of Venus, children. All right. So is there intent? Yes. Is it ever expressed by Aeneas? No. We don't see Aeneas say anything about an intent to marry. And in fact, we only have to look at the rest of the text to see from his behavior whether he is consenting to marriage or whether he is not. So with regard to wedding and marriage ceremonies, I was amazed to find out that, contrary to what my textbooks have taught me, our knowledge of the specifics of Roman marriages is somewhat imperfect. I have the quote here from Hirsch. The only thing that we can draw as a certainty about Roman wedding ceremony is that every ceremony was different. So what we look at is we look at some poetic evidence and some fictional evidence in terms of the way that weddings are depicted, right? So then a little bit more about the ceremony. If the wedding was not strictly necessary in the formation of a legal marriage, again, this is Hirsch, and it follows with what I was saying earlier. It's not technically a religious rite. It's perhaps more of a rite of passage for the bride, but not for the groom. That's interesting to consider because for Dido, that's completely unnecessary. Dido doesn't need a wedding. She's already been married. She is an independent woman. So that really doesn't apply to her. The majority of the many explanations of the rites and the accoutrement focus on the bride and her transition from a virgo, a maiden, to a matrona, a married woman. Again, that does not apply to Dido. And then finally, Roman law does not require the performance of any ceremony, religious or secular, for validation of a marriage. There are ceremonies that are connected with betrothal and weddings, but there's no mention of them in legal sources. So what we're looking for, right, in terms of what their traditional rites are, is there's a nubere, a veiling of the bride. There's the deductio, which is the leading of the bride from the ceremony. There's the marriage torches, the taida or the fax. Generally, there is a pronuba, the matron of honor, who is an important part of the celebration. We hear about the hymenaio from the Greek. That's the wedding chant. And then perhaps something that the textbooks love, which is the binding phrase, quando tu Gaius ego Gaia, where the woman is bound to the man and adopts, in some sense, his identity. All right, so what do we have for a marriage? One thing that's interesting is that my students, when we study this in AP class, refer to these lines as sexy cave time, because it's really unclear what happens, right? Dido and the Trojan leader come down into the same cave, primordial earth, and Juno, as Pronuba, gives the sign, lightning flashes, and heavens bear witness to the wedlock, and nymphs howl from the highest peaks. This was the first day of death and the first cause of her misfortunes. Not even by appearance of reputation is she moved. Dido no longer harbors a secret love. She calls it a marriage, and this name cloaks the shame. So we have sort of a twofold problem. One is what we describe as a marriage. And then 2 is Virgil lets it be very clearly known that that thing that she calls a marriage is not, it's a culpa, right? So she's concealing something with the name of a marriage, but that thing actually is a culpa or a fault, right? So it comes to the idea of what is this tricky passage doing in Virgil? Why is it there, or what's going on? And what we have to look at is, what does Virgil do with all of the episodes in the Aeneid, and how does this fit into that category? So does it work on a historical level? What relationship does it bear to any of Homer's works? What relationship does it bear to Augustan Rome, right? So some things that you might consider is Dido Circe? Is she Nausicaa? Is she Calypso? Even more interesting, some people suggest that Dido is Medea. All of those characters are sort of precursors for Dido. And I think that what happens is Virgil includes elements of all of those characters to create sort of a new danger for Aeneas. And that danger evolves. At first, Aeneas lands in an unknown land. His men are threatened. Some of his men are lost to him at first. He discovers them. There's a lot of tension as to how Dido is going to react. And that tension is resolved almost immediately. But then we have this new sort of like Circe episode where it's unclear whether Virgil will be delayed significantly from his journey, and whether it will cost him a lot of his men to escape from this danger. And that will persist really till the end of the book, the end of book 4 at least, right? And if we look, there's a rising tension, right? And then mid-book is where that's going to switch from, is Aeneas going to be trapped by a love affair? And then suddenly it becomes the danger of, is Aeneas going to be trapped by a spurned lover? So taking a look at book 4, Dido moves from heartache to heartache, right? As her amour transforms into connugium, and then in the end to a culpa, right? At the beginning of the book, she is Regina gravi saucia cora, right? She's already gravely wounded, right? And she feeds the wound and is seized by its blinding fire, right? So she's heartsick with love, and she also has regret about Zacchaeus, right? And this will evolve into her being sort of heartsick and regretting ever having loved at the end of the book, right? So it closes in the end with, thus she spoke and cut the hair with her right hand, and all warmth slipped away, and the life fled on the winds. So she begins with a metaphorical wound, which she feeds until in the end she has a self-inflicted wound, which ends the one suffering and her life, right? So quick overview. In book 1, Juno offers a durable marriage to Aeolus, right? That's going to come back. That phrase recurs again in book 4 when Juno and Venus are talking. And in book 1, Aeneas offers items from Helen's dowry as gifts to Dido. And this really was one of the first things that got me thinking about this was, is this some sort of foreshadowing of the doom that the relationship with Aeneas spells, not only for Dido in the short term, but also long range for Carthage, right? So we have Dido heartsick, which we covered previously in 416. Anna advising about children, which we saw at 433. Anna advises marriage, also same from our passage we saw earlier, 445. Juno proposes marriage. This is the discussion that we saw earlier between the goddesses, 496. Juno plans the wedding, right? And so she outlines her scheme to make this work. That's at 4124. Then there's the marriage, which is the cave scene. And that is followed almost immediately by Iarbas discovering what he describes as a marriage, right? That's at 4191 and following. Then Aeneas, we find, or I should say, Mercury finds Aeneas acting like a husband, right, at 4260, and then Mercury calls him out on that at line 265. That really is sort of the turning point of the ascending marriage language, because then we have our book 4, Mercury calling Aeneas husbandy, which is where we stopped before. There is one point where I look back here to book 2, when Aeneas recounts the story of his leaving Troy. He talks about Creusa appealing to him as her husband and saying, "You've got to take me with you." And that is going to recur when Dido makes a similar pledge to him, but can't call it a marriage at 4323, right? So after Aeneas gets called out by Mercury, Aeneas refers to the relationship merely as such a love, and he doesn't know how to end such a love at line 4291. Dido invokes their love, marriage, and her life at line 307. She tries to legitimize the marriage. We'll look at that in line 327. Then finally, Aeneas denies none of her claims except that they are married. And this is at line 333. And then finally, it wraps up with book 4, 550 and 551, where she laments ever having been married and wishes to have lived as a wild beast. So let's look at those lines. Juno offers connubo jungum stabili propriumque dicabo, and this is when she is trying to offer a bribe to have the winds waylay Aeneas and his fleet. And then those same words come back when she is talking about the relationship of Dido and Aeneas, when she offers connubo jungum stabile propriumque dicabo, right? And even says hic hymenaeus, this will be a wedding. So here's the line with the dowry that I mentioned, right? So competeret in concessosque hymenaeos ex tulit matris leda mirabile donum. So when Argive Helen is brought from Mycenae, seeking Troy and impossible marriage vows, sort of foreshadowing the fact that there is no possibility of a marriage here either, right? So wondrous gifts indeed, but with a bad track record. Here are the lines comparing the abandoning of Creusa with the abandoning of Dido. The highlighting shows the et conjunx quondam tu dicta relinquor. Creusa says, and I once called your wife. Are you going to abandon the one once called your wife? Whereas Dido has to say, will you desert me, guest, since that is all that remains of our marriage, right? She can't call him husband. She can't claim to be a wife. All that's left of the relationship that they have is the guest-host relationship. At line 16, we have her saying, I do not wish to join myself to anyone bonds of marriage. She's wearied by bridal chambers and bridal torches. But perhaps to this one, fault, I would be able to surrender, right? So some foreshadowing for her, but the reader doesn't necessarily know what kind of negative outcome that this will have, right? Then Juno's proposal of marriage, again, pactosque hymenaeos, right? Dotalisque dextri, she uses language to describe marriage hymns, wedding pacts. Dotalis is dowry, and then dextri, the joined right hands of marriage, right? Competeret in right? Competeret in concessosque hymenaeos, again, impossible marriage there repeated, right? So pactosque hymenaeos versus in concessosque hymenaeos. All right. Fate and Iarbas say she's married, right? So here we have line 199. She describes Dido as having joined herself to a Wero, a husband, right? Beautiful Dido has joined herself to this man born of Trojan blood. And then later, Connubia nostra repulit anc dominum. She spurned my marriage, but she's taken this other man as her master or as her husband. So Iarbas views this as a wedding, and that's of course based on fama, or that's the reputation. The word on the street is that they are married, right? Which actually is part of a legal marriage. Do they represent themselves as married? So here's a great one, right? Aeneas is doing dives, he's out working, and he has dives quae munera Dido facere. So has some riches, which Dido had made for him as an offering of her duty to him, right? So she's treating him as a husband, and he's of course wearing Tyrian garments. He's wearing garments which reflect his relationship to Dido and his pardon me, his affection for the situation, I guess is the best way to put it. That he may not be in love with her, but he does enjoy being a king. And then Mercury finds fault with this. Whether Aeneas is just sort of in love with being a king and having a city, or whether he really is in love with Dido, he's clearly behaving in a way which does not fit with what the gods have in mind for him. By the gods, of course, I mean just Jupiter. But he is taking care of things, right? Fundamenta locus pulcrumque uxorius urbum, right? Is this husbandly duty that you're building this beautiful city, right? You're extruis, right? The altai Cartaginus, right? You're building the wrong city, right? Alas, you forgot the kingdom and the affairs of your people, which is really what sort of shakes him, right? Oops. So he says, oh, I don't know how to nescia tantos rumpi non spirat amoris. How do you break up such a love? Not a marriage, not a relationship, but a love. And he does not say whether it's just a love of her, so a love from Dido, or whether he reciprocates that, but he does describe this as a love which must be broken, right? So once she hears of this, of course, he tries to keep it quiet, and they come back, right? Nec te nostra amor, nec te data dextra quondam, nec moritura tenet credele funere Dido, right? So our given right hands, our right hands joined, right? This sign of matrimony, does that not bind you, right? There's an interesting note here that the data dextra is going to come back, and he is going to use data dextra as sort of a means to justify that he must kill Turnus because of his data dextra, his right hand given to Evander in an oath. Interestingly, I always thought that this section at 327 was meant to be especially sort of pathetic, to really get empathy from the reader, or perhaps make Dido even perhaps seem unappealing. But it is interesting here that she says that she's seeking Ciboles, offspring. And if we look at the requirements for a legal marriage, a legitimate marriage, offspring is one of those things. So not only can she be saying, hey, listen, I really wish I had a little Aeneas, right? So that I could remember you by his face. There's more to that. If she's left with an offspring, then the relationship was legitimate, and she doesn't appear to be such a fool. Also, if there is an offspring, that provides her with a line of succession, which is going to be a problem for Dido, right? Dido does not have children. She is unmarried. It is unclear how power is going to be transferred in her kingdom. So there's a lot more going on with his leaving without having fostered any sort of offspring than just that she's sort of begging and pathetic and wishing that she had some way to recall him after his departure, right? So here's this great thing, right? I'll never deny anything which you've said, except I deny that we were married, right? So nec conjugas umquam praetende titus aut haec in foedera veni. I didn't offer you marriage ceremony or come into a marriage pact, right? Which seems to be denying her claim. But he also, in this, where he makes these offers of, hey, I'll always say nice things about you. I'll always be fond of the time that I've spent here. That's also Aeneas pedaling back to the guest host relationship, which is where their relationship starts when he first meets her and says, hey, if you'll take care of us, we'll say nice things about you all of the time. So when she says that guest is all that remains of our relationship, that is an interesting undertone that's repeated both in things that Aeneas says and in things that Dido says, that they're forced back to this guest host relationship, which he may have violated by taking advantage of her hospitality to some extent, but she in fact does not violate by having him and all of his men killed, right? So at 550, it has not been, she's dreading that she wasn't allowed to live a life free from the marriage chamber without sin, and this is great, like a wild animal, right? And to not experience such cares. So she's wishing that she were free and feral, right? There's feri, and didn't have to deal with these sort of entanglements, which is sort of a bad sign for someone who is supposed to be a monarch, right? So I'll put up my bibliography here and leave some final thoughts. The arc of the relationship really is an interesting element where Virgil is looking for an opportunity to create tension where there is no immediate danger. So there's a perception of danger at first. What are these Tyrians going to do to us? And then when they extend hospitality, how do we create new danger? And again, it's the relationship of the gods, Juno and Venus, that really creates most of the tension here. And as is the case, whenever the gods sort of generate these situations of tension, the resolution of that tension is usually with the death of someone or multiple people. And that really is one of the thoughts that I find interesting and might want to pursue in further research. And that is the idea that, oops, there it is. The deception of Dido seems similar to the way that Hector has to be lured to his fate, or even Turnus is in some ways lured to his fate, where someone has to go down when Hector knows that he's going to have to face Achilles and convince him to turn around and fight Achilles, to stop running away. And Turnus is lured away from battle early on to prevent him from causing too much trouble or getting into trouble. And then later, when he's getting ready, he's deceived into having the inferior sword that fails him and leads to his death. And there's this idea that I would like to look at about how the lives of these characters may be sacrifices that somehow the author thinks are necessary. And that kind of is interesting because Dido is always kind of, I don't know, sort of given second tier status, but I think that that may not be what Virgil had intended for her. That her death, her suicide, and her death is as significant an event in the legend or the story of the founding of Rome as the death of any of the warriors. So that's just something that I'm interested at looking at in the future. And also, there's some other information about the hunt procession that's really interesting, that comes up in some of the secondary research that I haven't included here. But in the interest of time, I tried to keep to just the bare minimum. Hopefully this gives you something to think about. I know that it gave me pause to consider how I had been reading, especially Dido's speech to Aeneas, and what she asks of him, what she claims, and his responses. Clearly, with regard to, is there a legal marriage? Aeneas is never shown to consent. Aeneas is never shown to intend marriage. Aeneas is never shown to fulfill those obligations. Instead, what we see is his mother assenting to these things, and allowing this to happen, really in sort of a frustrating way for the mortals, but in a way which is not uncommon at all in our epics, where the actions of the immortals result in countless casualties on Earth. So hopefully you enjoyed the presentation. I will stop the share, and hopefully if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me. I don't know if that will work. I don't know if I can put my email in there, but I'll have my email available as part of the presentation materials, and please feel free to email me if you have questions or thoughts for additional research. I really do enjoy reading and studying virtual, and that is part of my ongoing research in my doctoral program. So hopefully I will have answers for you if you have questions, or hopefully if you have suggestions for me, it can lead to some productive research. Thank you so much.